great pleasure to bring to you this webinar where we will discuss how we can leverage the power of narratives to change complex behaviors. That is, how we can bring about behavior change through the power of storytelling, or what is also called entertainment education. Before we begin, a very brief introduction to the Center for Social and Behavior Change. CSBC is a part of Ashoka University, and it was set up by a grant from the Gates Foundation in collaboration with the Harvard University's T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Our vision is to establish an institution in India that is globally reputed for thought leadership and excellence in impactful behavior change interventions for low-income and marginalized populations. The center is set up on the belief that beyond policy and supply, effective behavior change requires good communication and design to make it easier for people to adopt services and change behaviors. Some of the very first investments of the center were in the domain of entertainment education, where we as a center managed and led the impact evaluation of 3 large multimedia interventions addressing complex behaviors such as family planning, sexual health of young people, and sanitation. Through these evaluations, the intention was to understand how effective these interventions were in changing the drivers of behaviors, drivers such as social norms, mental models, attitudes, and how did the interventions engage audiences, and what exactly was the pathway of change. These interventions were spread across different media such as television, digital and social media, what is called OTT, IVRS, and others. Now, insights from these evaluations have helped us create a body of evidence on what kind of content works, in which kind of medium, and with what target audiences. And this discussion today is part of our knowledge sharing initiatives and will help us kickstart a nuanced conversation on how entertainment education can be leveraged for social good. We have today a very distinguished panel of speakers, and it is my pleasure to introduce them. Our keynote speaker is Professor Ileana D. Ferreira, Chair of Development Economics. Chair of Development Economics at Bocconi University in Milan, Italy. Her research focuses on the role of social factors in economic development. She has studied ethnic diversity, kin structure, and social norms, and of course, the effects of television on social outcomes. Next, we have with us Professor Suruchi Sood from Drexel University in Philadelphia, where she is Professor of Communication. Her specific area of expertise is studying entertainment education. That is, the embedding of educational messaging within popular communication formats and channels. Next, we have Mr. Shogata Mukherjee from Sony Live, the digital business of Sony Network in India. He was previously heading content at Star TV and brings a breadth of experience across the fragmented and complex media landscape of India. We will then have Mr. Siddharth Swaroop from Facebook India, where he is currently leading social impact, education, and communities. He actually straddles the development and private sector across his long career. He has worked with organizations like the Gates Foundation, BBC Media Action, and brings a very diverse range of experience from having worked in several countries across the world. And last, we have Ms. Archana Vyas, Deputy Director and Head of Communication at the Gates Foundation. She is also the one who incubated the idea of CSBC and is also the driving force behind some of the most innovative communication interventions in the deaf sector in India. She also brings with her rich private sector experience. So thanks again to all our panelists for being here today, for taking the time. Before we begin with our keynote address, a quick note for everyone. I would just like to remind all of our panelists to be cognizant of the time limits. Also, to our audience, it will be great if you could write down your questions in the chat, and we will address those towards the end of the presentations. So we will now begin with a keynote address from Professor Ileana de Ferreira, where she will address how entertainment education has been utilized for social good globally, how its impact has been evaluated, and what can be reasonably expected to accomplish. Over to you, Ileana.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to get my PowerPoint to overrule the window. I think I just managed. So thank you very much, everyone. It is a real pleasure to be invited to speak at this webinar, and I'm very excited about the prospects of entertainment education. So this is a great opportunity to interact with colleagues in India and elsewhere, and get to know about exciting work. So what I'm going to do today is to basically try and tackle a couple of issues. By no means this is going to be a comprehensive treatment of the topic, starting from how economists and social scientists have approached entertainment education and why. And here the starting point is a failure of tackling behavior change on dimensions that target deep preferences, such as sexual behavior, fertility, child rearing, gender-based violence, with traditional information campaigns. And the reason is that these behaviors entail not just rational or economic incentives and factors, but also complex social and psychological factors. And for this reason, there's been a recent move in the policy world to media-based approaches that mix education and entertainment. And I'm going to use the term edutainment as a shortcut for educational entertainment. And this has been defined as the intentional placement of educational content in entertainment methods. Examples are soap operas, reality shows, but more and more these can now be thought of as relating to newer forms of communication in social networks and the like. So why should edutainment work when other standard campaigns have failed? So here I'm going to be extremely, short and simplify everything. And Saruchi will forgive me. I hope she can expand in a better way later on. But I just wanted to highlight a few of the reasons that have been suggested. One is that these narratives are inherently easier to understand and remember compared to abstract concepts that sometimes are conveyed with traditional campaigns. Another is that when we blur fantasy and reality, people don't realize that there is an attempt to convey an educational message. And for this reason, they are less likely to raise some cognitive barriers or resist the message, which is what in technical jargon is called counter-arguing. And then it's easier for the content to filter through our mental processes. A third reason is that the characters we see on screen or elsewhere may serve as role models, and they can promote self-efficacy and help us adopt difficult behaviors or behaviors that are new for us. Why? Because we see that it's feasible, but also because we see exemplification of many of the steps that are needed to achieve a certain goal. And finally, something that's not been really stressed in the standard discourse around edutainment, but that we think might be at play as well, is that when we see programs on TV or elsewhere, we also get signals about what could be common norms, socially approved norms. So our perceptions and beliefs about these norms might shift. And this is something that I will discuss when I talk about an example of an evaluation that I've done with Abhijit Banerjee and Victor Roscoe. So the organizers of the panels have asked me to focus on two key questions. One is, what outcomes has education entertainment target? So here, if we look at the body of evidence coming from media programs in general, television, radio, there's quite a lot of evidence and quite a broad variety of outcomes. If we focus on educational media, the evidence is a bit more limited, especially when it comes to rigorous studies employing experimental methods. So today I will focus mostly on education entertainment. Occasionally I might cite work that comes from outside that, but I will just mention examples from edutainment. And also please forgive me, I'm not gonna give an exhaustive review of the literature. I'll just cite examples to discuss outcomes or methods, okay? So a first set of outcomes for which we know from rigorous evidence that edutainment works is information and knowledge. So there are several studies showing that exposing people to information about, for example, financial literacy or HIV and risky sexual behavior, or even public programs and what are the rules for applying to public programs, eligibility rules. Actually, the study cited at the bottom of my slide is about NREGA, the Indian worker program. So this is really something that's consistent across studies. If you just want to convey information, people are very receptive, it filters through and they retain it. You might be a bit more ambitious and also say, well, I want to change something deeper and not just give people information. I want to change people's attitudes, their beliefs, their aspirations. And here the evidence is also quite positive. There's a series of studies on gender attitudes and, for example, the acceptability of domestic violence. Jensen and Oster have a non-experimental paper on India, which was not about edutainment but cable TV, but still shows reduced acceptability of domestic violence. And in our work in Nigeria, we also find a clear reduction in acceptability of domestic violence. Stigma against HIV positive people is reduced, aspirations improve. So there's fascinating work by Bernard Derkon Orkin-Efese in Ethiopia, whereby simply showing short documentaries with success stories, they find that people have higher aspirations on income, wealth, and social status for themselves, and especially for their children. And finally, there's work on self-employment and occupational choice in Egypt. And this work, again, evaluated rigorously, finds that a series of episodes about self-employment improved attitudes or made people more eager to engage in this type of entrepreneurial. Now, where the evidence starts being a little less positive is on norms. Okay, early work by Betsy Paluk investigated the effect of radio soap operas that were talking about reconciliation on norms of interpersonal trust. And while she finds impacts on prescriptive norms, which is what should you do? Should you trust members of the other ethnic group in Rwanda? She doesn't find evidence of impact on descriptive norms, meaning what do people actually do? Okay, so these programs are effective in giving you a sense of what should be done, but you don't necessarily update on what is commonly done, probably unless you see others doing it in practice. Now, the thing we probably care the most when we think about development policy is measurable outcomes and behaviors. So what evidence do we have on these type of variables? And here I would say we do have evidence that edutainment is changing behavior. So it's not just changing knowledge or attitudes, it is changing behavior. We have evidence coming from fertility choices, evidence on health-seeking behavior. And again, I will tell you about our study on HIV testing. Evidence on entrepreneurship. Here, it's quite context dependent, and this is something that is general. We might find results in one place and not in another. For example, the study by Bjorvatten and co-authors in Tanzania finds that high school students exposed to these videos about entrepreneurs are more likely to create their own business. But in Egypt, Barsoum and co-authors find that while attitudes towards self-employment have changed, the actual practices and occupational choice do not. Okay, so again, why do they or do they not change? A lot of it has to do not only with the will of the person, it also has to do with the means. So maybe people would like to become entrepreneurs, but don't really have the capital. And so there are other market failures that might need to be addressed and for which edutainment is not enough. There's the study I mentioned earlier about aspirations finds effects on savings, investments in children's education. So these are hard variables, hard outcomes that are impacted. And there's fascinating work by Emma Riley that evaluated a movie that some of you might have seen. It's called Queen of Katwe. It's about a chess player, a young girl in Uganda. So she showed it to students in schools right before they took the test. And she found that girls clearly did better in their math tests after they were randomly exposed to these movies. So it could be about self-confidence, it could be about beliefs, but there is something that these programs can do that leads people to take different actions. So the other point on which I was asked to focus is on methodology. So we have those sets of outcomes that we want to investigate. How can we do that? And here, there's some non-experimental methods that have been used, especially in work about media in general, not about edutainment. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to go over this. People might be familiar with difference in different methods or instrumental variables techniques. So let me focus on experimental methods, which is what people working on edutainment nowadays are more likely to use. So one first set of studies has implemented randomized controlled trials where the randomization was at the level of exposure. So whether you see the program at all or you don't see it, okay? So this applies to all the studies you see there. And the way to implement this is to randomly select some units. This could be individuals, they could be villages, they could be schools. And these units will receive the program, while another group of units, which we call the control group, will either receive nothing or they will receive a placebo program, the one that doesn't have educational content. So with these type of approaches, we have strong advantages because it's a very clean comparison of what happens with or without education and entertainment. And by comparing these outcomes, we can get at the causal impact of entertainment. It also allows us to manipulate treatments to get at the mechanism. What are the disadvantages? First of all, it's the cost, because you literally have to organize screenings. You need to create mini movie theaters or occasions for people to watch where you are the ones that's showing the program. Also, because you're doing it in this way, it's not maybe as natural a setting as when you watch TV at your place. And you also need to make sure that you collaborate with the provider of the program so that this is not made available to the general population during the evaluation. So it cannot be seen at free will by everybody, otherwise your control group might be contaminated. So an alternative approach that has been adopted is again to randomize, but this time you're randomizing encouragement. So everybody in principle can watch the program, for example, because it's on a national TV channel. But what you do is you randomly select units that will receive a message that encourages them to watch the program. Okay? And the people who are encouraged are more likely to take it up. And the people who are not, instead, might be watching something else. And here, what can be varied in the design is whether you give people financial incentives to watch, or whether you encourage the control group to watch something else at the same time, just to make sure that they stay clear of the program that you're trying to evaluate. What are the advantages? The advantages is that it's closer to the natural experience of watching TV, because I get encouraged and I watch it on my own television at home. And also you can evaluate the program while it is rolled out at scale. So while the intervention is taking place, you evaluate. But this comes at the cost. The first is low statistical power. Why? Because some people in the treatment group will decide not to watch despite the encouragement, and some in the control will decide to watch nonetheless. Okay, so this decreases our ability to detect. And the other disadvantages is that maybe you are paying more attention just because I sent you the encouragement and I don't know what you would do if I hadn't done it. Okay? Finally, you cannot do too many experimental manipulations to understand mechanisms. So I want to conclude with a quick example of the evaluation we did in Nigeria about Sugar, which is a show by MTV International about youth and risky behavior HIV prevention. So with Victor Orozco and Abhijit Banerjee, we randomized exposure to sugar, targeting young people between 18 and 25-year-olds in urban and peri-urban location. And we created 80 screening centers where people were either exposed to sugar, so this would be the treatment group, the third season of Sugar, or to a control show, which is called Giddy Up, that was very similar, but didn't have any educational component. And we designed the evaluation not only to get at the basic question, was sugar effective, but also to try and understand whether it was effective because people learned on their own, or whether they also depended on views about what others around them were thinking. So a first treatment arm was just showing the movie, or the TV series to be more precise. Another arm was showing the TV series, but also complementing it with what we call the announcement treatment. What was this? We were showing statistics about data that we collected about the views of people that had watched Sugar. So for example, we asked people, suppose you had HIV, would you tell your partner? This was the result of our questionnaire. And then we showed it after screening Sugar to see if people were shocked positively or negatively by this information about others' opinions. And then we also allowed people to invite friends to the movie or not. This was another dimension on which we randomized, and we tested for spillovers on other people. So what did we find? We found very clear improvements in knowledge, attitudes, testing, so the probability of testing doubled. We found some impacts on risky sexual behavior, for example, a reduction in the number of concurrent partnerships, although no effect on condom use, which was a clear message in the show. This didn't go through, but at the same time, we detect a 55% decrease in sexually transmitted diseases for women, which suggests that even if they were not using condoms, they were actually adopting safer behavior, okay? And the impact is stronger for viewers that were more involved with the narrative. So we measured transportation and identification using variables suggested by psychologists, but we find very weak evidence of social effects. So our announcement treatment didn't really work as we expected. So the impact seems to have gone through individual learning as opposed to this. So let me just wrap up with some policy implications. Even in the absence of social multipliers and social effects, just these individual impacts are striking. per se, okay? And they suggest that these edutainment programs can reach a large number of people at low marginal cost. Once you produce the show, distributing it is very cheap. Also, they have the potential of reaching viewers who have low literacy, and these are a target that traditional behavior change campaigns have trouble reaching. Of course, we're not at a stage where we know everything we should know. So there is scope to learn how to deliver the message, for example, experimentally manipulating content. There is scope to learn how long the effects last for and how frequent the exposure should be. There can be unintended effects. So you could mislead people by selecting information. And also sometimes just to capture the attention of viewers, you put in messages that are not as virtuous as the one that you may be trying to promote. And finally, the last clear risk is instrumental manipulation. So there is a fine line between education and ideology, and in settings with weak institutions, edutainment programs may get captured by politicians. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to learning about the other panelists' experiences.
Thank you so much, Eliana. That was really interesting. We have a number of questions already here on both, so methodologically, as well as some of the specific interventions like MTV Sugar and Queen of Cutway that you mentioned. So we will get to that towards the end. Thank you again. Moving on to our next panelist, Professor Suruchi Sood, sorry. We'd like to understand from you the mechanism of how EE works. What makes content compelling, and what psychological or social processes does it trigger to bring about changes in attitudes, norms, mental models, intent, all the things that Eliana just spoke about. So over to you, Suruchi.
Let me share my screen. Hello, everyone. I hope you can see my screen. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share my thoughts about how entertainment education, specifically long-running narrative formats, are eminently suited to promote both individual and social change across development sectors. So storytelling essentially is as old as humankind. Storytelling is essentially, like I said, as old as humankind. And we know this because we have evidence from wall paintings made by cave dwellers. Also, storytelling is a uniquely human activity. So according to Terry Pratchett, a British author, plenty of creatures are intelligent, but only one tells stories. So this information validates William Fisher's theory that human beings are essentially storytellers. In fact, he goes as far as to refer to human beings as homo narrans, or intelligent beings that tell stories. Jeez. Oopsie, sorry about that. So to move on, despite its ancient roots, we've been telling stories for as long as humankind has existed. We have only used storytelling as a strategic way or a strategic entry point for promoting social and behavior change in international development in the last 50 years or so. And since the academic interest in entertainment education began, monitoring and evaluation of communication programs have showcased a plethora of evidence, both factual and anecdotal, that EE works. So development programming using communication has focused almost exclusively on effects and effectiveness. So a less explored question is really, how does it work? Not just does it work, but the process of how it works. And before I go into the explanation of the how, let me just tell you that the examples that I'm going to provide you about EE, I refer to them as falling into 3 buckets. And the 3 buckets are unplanned entertainment education, semi-planned entertainment education, and finally, planned entertainment education, which is what most of us really focus on. So one of the earliest examples of unplanned entertainment education is from 1969. It's a show called Simplemente Maria, which means Simply Maria. And this show captured the imagination of millions of viewers all across Latin America. Maria, the main protagonist, buys a sewing machine in an effort to improve her life. And over time, she becomes rich and famous as a fashion designer. Interestingly, during the broadcast, the sale of Singer sewing machines shot through the roof. One reason for this was that Maria was a role model to young women in several of these countries. Then there is the example of semi-planned entertainment education. And this usually involves the incorporation of educational messages into popular media. This is often the case, for example, in the US, where organizations like the Centers for Disease Control and Hollywood Health and Society, which is based at the University of Southern California, work very closely with television and film producers to introduce accurate information into fictional news. So one example of this is a long-running American television show, ER, which was on air for 15 seasons from 1994 to 2009. And it came to be known as a made-up hospital that provides real medicine. So a study done on this show found that viewers' knowledge about emergency contraception and about HPV increased after watching episodes that mentioned these subjects. A third of the respondents also said that the show helped them make proper medical choices or healthcare choices. And a different study with doctors showed that 1 in 5 doctors said that patients asked about diseases and or treatments that they had seen on shows like ER. So that brings us to the third or the biggest bucket, which is what we call the planned entertainment education. This is popular across the globe, but more specifically in low and middle income countries. And it involves fostering multi-sectoral partnerships with government, non-government organizations, media, and of course, in some cases, also private partners to design, implement, and evaluate a narrative program from the ground up. The value of this approach is that it has an ability to tackle a wide range of developmental issues within one intervention. I have way too many examples from my own work and from the work of others about the effectiveness of these programs. So for example, one way to look at effectiveness is statistically, and another way is to look at when terminology from these entertainment education narratives makes its way into popular culture. So for example, in Tanzania, I was very many years ago part of an evaluation of a project, a radio project called Twende na Wakati, or Let's Go with the Time. And in Tanzania, the term don't be a Makwaju being the main character, referred to a man who had multiple concurrent sexual partners. In Indonesia, the Bahasa term Siaga, which means alert, based on a maternal and neonatal health entertainment education program, the word Siaga became a brand name for maternal and neonatal health. In Nepal, we had a project that provided this idea of how men should be involved in reproductive health, and the notion of a man who was involved in reproductive health issues vis-a-vis communication as well as action was a good husband, and in Nepali that translated into Ashal Logne. And finally, I have an example from Tanzania, in Rwanda, where in response to a storyline about poaching on the radio, one of the characters gets caught in his own trap and his foot turns gangrenous. So audiences were actually writing to the show that, listen, this is being broadcast during dinner, and it's really hard for us to eat dinner because we can actually smell his foot on the radio. Now, again, that's not really possible, but that's what we're talking about when we're talking about narrative engagement. So let me talk about, how does EE work? And what I want to do is I want to share with you 5 reasons that I think are important to answer this how question. So the first one is social learning. And what these EE programs do is provide opportunities for social learning. This is, of course, based on Albert Bandura's social cognitive theory. We know individuals perform behaviors by paying attention to what others are doing, determine their own capacity or capability to do those behaviors, weigh the consequences of doing or not doing a behavior, and finally enact a behavior in their own lives. So there are several constructs in the social learning theory that are important. One is vicarious learning. Narratives resonate particularly well with audience members when they perceive stories to be realistic and they can identify with the characters. So if the stories and the characters are realistic, or if they are aspirational, which means that audiences want to be like their favorite character. The second is role modeling. Narratives allow audiences to observe consequences of actions. So well-designed entertainment education narratives include positive, transitional, and negative characters. Over the course of the storyline, audiences observe positive characters get rewarded and negative characters get punished. And they also have the actions of the transitional characters, which model for them how to embrace changes in their own life. And these transitional characters further promote efficacy among audiences with whom the program resonates. And these things all work in tandem to promote individual and social change. The second how I want to talk about is what we call immersion. Now, this is borrowed from a German term, Pseudo-Gemeinschaft, or fake community. And it was known as parasocial interaction. 1956, Wharton and Hall came up with this concept, and immersion has been referred to by many names. For example, so here's a fan who says, I feel like Harry Potter is a real friend of mine. And Harry Potter says, first of all, I'm not a real person. And second of all, I don't even know this guy. So there's, ample theorizing and research on this idea of audience involvement on the role of narratives over the last 30 years. And you'll notice that there is a real lack of terminological agreement here because people have used terms like parasocial interaction, audience involvement, narrative transportation, narrative identification, character identification, narrative engagement, and narrative persuasion. And like I said, this has been a field of study for a long time. When I wrote my dissertation in 1999, I wrote it about audience involvement. And this was with a radio show in India, an entertainment education show called Tinka Tinka Sukh. And as recently as 2019, one of my doctoral students, Amy Henderson Riley, wrote her dissertation on narrative persuasion and how narrative persuasion mediates behavior and social change. And her work was done in Mozambique, again, on an entertainment education narrative program called Ouro Negro, or Black Gold. So despite the lack of terminological agreement, there is little debate that entertainment education lends itself to an audience involvement or audience immersion, which in turn is associated with behavior and social change. The third how, I feel, is the power of narratives to elicit effective responses from audiences. The role of emotions or affect on human behaviors has often been ignored by Western scholars because most Western scholars tend to treat human beings as purely rational. Narratives, it is clear, are a powerful intervention tool for eliciting emotional responses. And we also have evidence from the literature that shows that audio and video messages are more effective than those that are delivered through print. So have you ever found yourself biting your nails in a suspense drama when a character is about to fall into a trap? So that is what we call an emotional response. Or have you found yourself watching movies that have your favorite film star in it. So when the same film star, for example, asks you to ensure that your child is vaccinated, people report that they have to do the behavior because they were asked by this person who they trust and they look up to. And I'm referring to the polio campaign that used Amitabh Bachchan as a spokesperson in India. And some initial research we did showed that about 12% of the participants who showed up at the polio booth said they had come there because Amitabh Bachchan had asked them to be there. The fourth how relates to the ability of narratives to promote discussion and dialogue. Here, instead of an example from my work, let me share a personal story with you. So I have 3 teenage boys, and my oldest, several years ago now, started a new school when he was in grade 11. We had heard rumors that his high school had had some issues with underage drinking. In the course of watching an episode titled Blame It on the Alcohol from one of our favorite television shows, Glee, which is a high school drama, I was able to ask my son several questions and engage in a real conversation with him about the drinking culture in his school. And we were able to do this without being embarrassed or without him getting angry with me. So it really gave us that space to have a conversation which we could decontextualize from our own lives, although we know that we were talking about what was going on in his school. And finally, is this idea of shifting social norm. So we know that EE has the power to shift not just individual behaviors, but also social norms, at least theoretically. Empirically, as Ileana said, we are still in the process of sort of proving this. So what do we mean by norms? We are guided by what others do and what others think we should do, right? Human beings don't live in a vacuum. So a case in point here, for example, would be child marriage. So a narrative storyline, let's say around how a family and a community expectations result in child marriage. So let's say there's a girl who gets married early, and this in turn in the narrative results in negative consequences. And when this is sort of seen along or mirrored with the positive consequences of a young girl completing her education and getting a job and being independent, then we know that both of these things are happening. So we can get a sense of norm abandonment, so where people are giving up a negative behavior, and also norm replacement, which is EE introducing an innovation or a new idea that is associated with a separate set of practices. Now, I can attest to 2 examples of this work. One is from India, which is a really popular television show that we have several publications on. This is called Kyunki Jeena Isi Ka Naam Hai, or Because This Is Life. And there's another one from Bangladesh called Ichhe Dana, which is On the Wings of Wishes. And both of these shows garnered large audiences, and research also shows that they impacted social norms around child marriage. Now, I don't have the time for details, but we do have an upcoming book chapter on how EE impacts social norms, which I'd be very happy to share with you once it's published. And so my hypothesis really is that narratives help in 2 ways. One is they give you confidence to abandon a harmful traditional practice. And second, they increase acceptance of a new, innovative behavior. So essentially, before I close, a final point that I wanted to make was to repeat that these 5 hows, vicarious learning and role modeling, immersion into an emotional response to a narrative, opportunity for dialogue and shifting social norms, they don't work in isolation. Well-designed, implemented and evaluated entertainment education requires all of these factors to come together before the magic happens. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Suruchi. Moving on to our next panelist, Siddharth Swaroop from Facebook. Siddharth, from your experience in both the deaf sector and the communications industry, we would like to hear from you about the trends that you are seeing in consumption patterns of audiences across media, how people engage with different media, for example, TV, social, OTT, etc. And I know we've spoken about this earlier. And how do we account for these sort of dynamic trends when packaging content, particularly deciding on what platforms, what content length, what kind of content format, interactivity, etc.
Sure. Let me share my screen. Great. Is it visible?
Yes.
Great. Good evening, everyone. So my first exposure to entertainment education was about 2 decades ago, which kind of gives away my age. But it was a program called Shabut Sati in Bangladesh, which ended up becoming one of the most successful serials at that time in Bangladesh. And we achieved a lot of the metrics around behavior change, attitudinal shifts, norms, etc. And since then, I've worked on about 20 different entertainment education programs, not just TV dramas, but whole 360-degree communication programs. 3 of them in just the last 2.5 years. So 3 major programs. And here's what I can say after doing all of this work, that I think the industry has not evolved since I first got exposed to it. I think a lot of the expertise comes from almost few decades ago, and I think the changing trends have not necessarily been imbibed by the industry. So I want to talk about those. Both entertainment and education are undergoing a tectonic shift. So let's start with shifts in entertainment. Entertainment education was born from and thrives with the rise of mass media, right? I mean, even if you look at the Wikipedia definition, mass media kind of pops out at it. Unfortunately, mass media is going extinct. If people don't fully understand that or grasp that, it's a reality, and I can give some data around that, but mass media is really going extinct. It's like, fossil fuels are going to go extinct with the arrival of electronic vehicles. So that's the first, mass media to individualized media. If you look at, the projections of revenue from traditional television, it's dropping like dramatically. It's in the negative. The only thing that's growing right now is OTT. It's things like Netflix and Hotstar and all the different OTT platforms. They are the ones that are growing. And if you think this is a urban and more than that, I think digital like YouTube, Facebook are absolutely dominating. And if you think this is a urban phenomenon, semi-urban phenomenon, not rural, let me just share some data. It's now estimated that there are 300 million rural internet users in India, of a total of about 700. Nearly 300 million FB users, 100 million Instagram users, 500 plus million Google searches happen per day in India. 60% are non-urban, 34% are rural, 700 million YouTube views per day. About 30% are only urban, and about 38% are rural. So this is a phenomenon that's happening across. And in fact, rural is growing at about 35%, whereas urban is only growing at about 7%. So most of the growth we are seeing in digital is happening in the rural. But the greatest difference is not, it's not that, okay, it used to be TV and now everything, the same thing will happen on digital. Digital is not mass media. And I want to repeat that. Digital is not mass media. It should never be called mass media. Just to give you a sense, 75% of subscribers select movies based on Netflix personal recommendations. All of us, all the time, we watch YouTube videos that are recommended to us. It's the algorithms that are determining what you and only you see. Not everybody is seeing the same thing. If you and your wife are sitting in the same room on your own phones or your own devices, you'll be seeing completely different things because different suggestions will come to you. So it's personalized, it's individualized, and by default, it is not mass. And that has a significant impact on how we think about content delivery, all of that. The way traditional entertainment education was designed around one serialized program or one big, centerpiece communication, it doesn't work like that anymore. The next big shift, of course, as a result of the previous one, is from going from long format to short format. As We are shifting our viewership from larger devices to smaller devices, and that shift is much larger in rural again compared to urban, because people don't have televisions there, they don't have flat screen TVs, and so on and so forth. We are seeing that attention spans are dropping, and as attention spans drop, short format videos start to become really big. TikTok was getting 1 billion views a day before it was banned in India. And here's the great thing about it, right? Like, I think I know what experts are going to tell me. Well, short format doesn't change behavior. Short format doesn't change social norms. And I agree with them. In the old paradigm of the old world of television, short format does not change behavior the way long format did. But in the new paradigm, it has huge potential. Today, we know that even a hashtag like hashtag Me Too can change norms, or at least has the potential to change norms. So, and we'll get to more of how we think about short versus long format. The third major shift that's happening is viewing to engaging. Now, I'm sure every single expert and all of you will agree that we want entertainment education to be engaging. But think about it, TV dramas are not engaging. They are designed for passive viewing. Games are engaging, right? Things like games are engaging. 2.7 billion gamers will spend about $159 billion in 2020 globally. And that number will go to 200 billion by 2023. And television is nowhere close to that number. Like, it's going to be left in the dust just from this one industry of gaming. And if any of you have tried this game called Lifeline, which is like a chatbot based story game where you become part of the storyline, it's like extreme immersive experience. There's adrenaline, there's dopamine, there's cortisol, all happening in your body at the same time. Stories that adapt to your moves, there's role play, there's learning from mistakes, there's course correction. These are all the things we want in entertainment education. But most entertainment education experts only talk about TV dramas. They don't talk about gaming when it's doing all the same things and has the potential to do all the same things we expect from entertainment education. And then there are shifts in education, right? Massive shifts. I think all of you know after COVID what's happening, but there's been shifts in education happening for a long time. My son has learned enormous things like all about science from YouTube, and not from as much from his school. That's the reality. So, from the time we've known education, it's always been linear, right? There's grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. There's chapterized classroom education. There's sequential drama series. All of it is very linear, but people don't learn linearly. In reality, people learn from the environment. If you think about it, you may watch a video about Trump on CNBC, and then you might see a post from your friend about Trump on Facebook, and then you'll click on that link, and then you go to a particular video, you watch that video, maybe that piques your interest, you go to YouTube, you search for Trump, maybe you see some stand-up comedy or some Fox News report, and all of these experiences are shaping your belief about Trump. After a while, you start debating with other people. You throw back the stuff that you heard in all these different media and all these different channels to your friends. And you start talking about those same things as though they are your beliefs. That's how beliefs change. That's how norms change. They don't change from one sponsored program. They change from this exposure that you get to the ecosystem of media around you. And there's this concept, which is the most important concept in behavior change, which is separation of message and sponsor. A single message given by CNBC or Fox News will make you feel this is CNBC's view. The same type of message, when you hear across a whole range of channels, you start to believe, okay, this is a general view. I either agree with it or I don't agree with it. That's how change occurs. So separation of message and sponsor is possibly the most important concept in media as we are moving towards digital media. And that same concept is also the basis of social learning. In the past, people used to say, okay, people are going to watch the television program together in the house, then they will sit on the dinner table, they will discuss the storyline, they will discuss the characters, and that's how absorption will happen. Not anymore. We are all watching our own programs independently. Social learning happens at a massive level on social media when you're interacting with people all over the world at the same time. It's communal, it's gamified, it's interactive. That's how social learning occurs. Therefore, there's a need to reimagine the way we design and evaluate entertainment education. The first thing we need to reimagine is the pedagogy. So let's start with sponsored program versus what I call motivated people. You can create, you spend $1 million or maybe $1 million rupees in India, whatever the amount is, you create a sponsored program. The best program in the country reaches maybe like 0.1% of the population. And then you do a great RCT and you say it worked or didn't work. But imagine if that same message could be delivered by hundreds or thousands of influencers that people already follow. Now there's this guy called Mr. Beast. And Mr. Beast has 41 or 42 million followers on his Facebook. Last year, he tied up with many different YouTubers and did a campaign where they said, we're going to raise funds to plant trees. He was able to raise $13 million and planted about 13 million trees. And that's possibly the largest impact on environment in that 1 year by anybody, any organization. And these were just YouTubers planning to do something and getting it done. Programs are not able to achieve that because they're sponsored. You either like them, you don't like them. It doesn't create that surround sound. So our approach at Facebook is to let 1,000 flowers bloom. And we've seen that work really, really well. The second pedagogical question is reflection versus involvement. Now, everybody would tell you, and Suruchi would tell you, people watch a program, they reflect, and that reflection leads to cognitive process that leads to change. When you're watching one program a day, maybe that works, but imagine when you're watching 20 episodes in a go of a particular TV program on Netflix. Yeah. There's no reflection happening there. It's just one after the other, one after the other. So how do you think about this new way of watching and then think about reflection versus engagement and involvement? And that, of course, then brings you to gamification and instant gratification, right? Like these days, we put out a post, we wait for how many likes did we get. People want instant gratification, and instant gratification actually brings about a visceral reaction in your body. It's been proven. You feel happy, you feel sad, you get more likes, less likes, and that kind of visceral reaction leads to change in people. The second thing is about content, right? How do we build playful interactivity? How do we use games? So we're just doing a campaign with, in fact, Archana, who's one of our panelists with Gates Foundation, where we are planning to promote masks for COVID. And we've tied up with this game called Ludo King, which has about 450,000 users daily. And we're just changing the rules of the game slightly to make convey messages about COVID and about wearing masks. And we could have just placed ads, right? I mean, that's the easiest thing Facebook can do. But this leads to real engagement. You think about loss, you think about victory on the basis of mask. So, and that then creates really high level of engagement. But the most important thing in content is who are the influencers and protagonists, right? Now, in the past, our influencers and protagonists were these TV drama serial stars, right? Like if it's starring Amitabh Bachchan and he has a particular character, he becomes your protagonist, and people like him or don't like him or whatever. In the new world, your protagonists are online. They're influencers with great influence. Now, if you just look at MTV Sugar, right? You've got 229K subscribers, which is great, 229,000 subscribers. I probably have like 20, so that's amazing. But compare that with a YouTube producer, YouTuber, Amit, who's got 21 million subscribers. MTV Sugar can't even compare. They can't even come close to this guy in 10 years with all the funding from all the donors. You take Mr. Beast, he's got 41 million subscribers. Now imagine if these guys, if you had access to 5,000 of them, 1,000 of these guys who would speak on your behalf, you can have real potential for social normative shifts, which you can't have with one program or even one campaign or even several campaigns through sponsorship. And finally, media planning, right? As I said, everything is served up to you. It's algorithms telling you what to watch. How do you get your program today to surface up on the algorithm? And there are ways to do it. AI can help a lot with it. It's not very expensive. You just need to understand it. You just need to study it. I don't have the time to get into how it works, but you can do AI-based SEO to get your content to show up. Finally, what kind of partnerships can help? And of course, I think Any partnership that you can get to get your content in is great. We should spend less money making content and more money inserting content where it matters. Finally, evaluation questions. These are the new evaluation questions for me. What is the difference in the cognitive process when you watch a program on TV, which is once a day or a few times a week, versus when you binge watch 20 episodes on a weekend? The impact of immersive gaming on adoption of behaviors, role of social media influencers on social norms. What is the cost effectiveness of AI-based SEO or segment of one marketing versus traditional media planning, which reaches a few people? So in conclusion, every media is consumed differently, and that consumer behavior determines the entertainment education outcome. So media determines outcome. Thank you. I'm finished.
Purnima? Apologies, I think Purnima might be having a technical difficulty, but no worries. Thank you so much for that, Sid. That was honestly very inspiring and really showed like what the future lies ahead. Now,
Can I just say one thing? Really
yes,
sorry. It's not the future, it's the present. I just want to clarify that. I know it looks like the future. It's what we do every day. Just making
yeah,
clear.
no, completely stand corrected. It is the present, and are we catching up to that, and are we accounting for that? Is really the question. So we now turn to Shoguto for his perspective from the private broadcast industry. Shoguto, we would love to understand from you and you to help us understand the media landscape of India, how the dev sector can navigate the complex and fragmented media markets and leverage all of these mediums and content formats to get our message across. We would particularly like to understand the ways in which we can partner with the media and the entertainment industry. So over to you, Shoguto.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me here. Well, I mean, I've heard all the three panelists with such great points that they made, and I was listening to them keenly. I don't have a presentation to make, but however, I'm going to touch upon the stuff that you just asked me to touch upon. I heard Siddharth's points, and I was feeling quite elated about the fact that I made the right choice of moving into the world of digital programming a few years back. However, I have a very contrarian view because I feel that however much we talk about the digital landscape in India today, and I can only speak for India, a lot of the submissions or a lot of the analogies used are still a little far off for India. Not very, but a little bit. If I just look at the numbers, I will just start with the numbers in terms of the content consumption in this country, right? We have, if I look at the universe of television, and I left television a few years back, like 3-4 years back. But if I just sort of looked up the numbers at BARC, and if you look at the total universe of television in this country, there are about like 197 million households, and there are about 850 million individuals, right? And I'm talking about only about the HSM market, which is the Hindi-speaking markets. If I break that, and in that we have a free part, and then we have a pay part of television. The free part is about 152 million viewers, and the pay viewers amount to about 683. Now, having been in both worlds of broadcast TV and being a part of probably the biggest broadcaster for a very long while, and also being a part of the biggest OTT player in the country, and now I've moved on to a not as big, but a fairly big broadcaster in the OTT broadcaster in the country. For entertainment education in this country, I feel that TV has a very, very strong role to play still. However much we talk about digital penetration, however much we talk about gaming, however much we talk about binge watching, it's just a little bit of the pyramid. I mean, it's just the top of the pyramid. I'm not even talking about my part of business that I lead, which is the SVOD market, right? Which is the top of the pyramid, which caters to, people like us, watch the Netflixes, binge watch over the weekend, watch Money Heist, and watch Dark and Ozark and Fargo, and the rest. Unfortunately, that SVOD market is something which doesn't really need much of entertainment education, the kind of stuff that you guys are working into. However, and that is, if I look at the universe of long format storytelling in this country of SVOD, it is no more than about 15 million people, right? And I'm not even going into, and that's the biggest number, and I'm not even going into the numbers of, say, the Netflixes or the Amazons, because they really are insignificant numbers today, right? But yes, there is a big leap that we are taking, and I think over the next few years it's going to change dramatically. If you look at how content programming is run, or if you look at how long format content programming is run today, is you have the SVOD structure, you have the AVOD structure, which is the freemium structure, right? Which is where you have catch-up television, and which is where you have a lot of viewership, which actually go back and watch a lot of content that our TV broadcast partners today make. So, when I look at just the numbers, 836, 850 million people, how, getting into their bedrooms and watching their soap. I think there is a great merit if we work on those numbers still, because the rural numbers are fairly large there, right? And then if I look at the universe of OTT, we have about 500 million people, a little more internet users in this country, but they snack in and snack out, and they probably at a median probably they consume about 20 minutes a day, and which includes everything, right? And then, of course, we have Instagram and TikToks of the world, where we have short format consumption. But those short format consumptions are very individual led. So one needs to be mindful of where to park their stories and how to sort of help them benefit through the individuals that you part with. Now, if I go back to broadcast television, and if I go back to how historically over the last few years or maybe decade or so, the characters that India has loved, it has always been the kind of characters who have been part of the big long running soaps. And I have been I was amazed when I was a part of the Star Network, and I was part of many researches, and there were a couple of shows. There was a show which talked about education, which is called Diya Aur Baati Hum, and it was talking about education, about adult education and stuff like that. And it made a world of difference, because the most loved Indian character for years was this girl called Sandhya, because she went and studied after marriage to become an IPS officer. And I can give you hundreds of examples or thousands of examples of women I've met in rural India who have said, oh, who do you want to be? I want to be a Sandhya, right? But I mean, and that is the power of storytelling. That is the power of education through entertainment. That is the way you build narratives around characters, and characters cannot be built in 5-minute episodes. It's very tough. Storytelling is an art form, and snackable content can possibly help in some PSAs, can possibly help in some sort of reaching a certain segment. But at the core of it, at least where we are working in terms of education, entertainment, or you guys are working, I feel you guys should still work with a lot of the broadcasters today who make a meaningful contribution towards imparting the kind of knowledge that needs to be imparted to the very nook and cranny of this country. I cannot speak for the West. I cannot speak for any other country, but I can speak for India for sure. It is still, we are scratching at the surface as far as telling long format stories or on OTT. I'm glad, I lead a big sort of corporation. I mean, a digital wing of a corporation where my job is to tell meaningful high-end, high-quality drama, right? And I have, and my audience scape is very, very limited. Like I said, my audience scape is limited to about 20 million people in this country who would pay for my content, right? And let's face it, the paying for that content is basis the credit card, is basis your UPI number, is basis the kind of transfers that you can make, and that is very, very male. Still, if you're doing, if you are buying content in this country, it is driven by the male audience. Whether it is Hotstar, whether it is Netflix, if it Amazon, Sony Live, all of us are heavily skewed towards a male audience, which is exactly the opposite of what broadcast television is. Broadcast television, at least pay TV in this country, is run on the back of women. They control the remote and they decide what to watch. And it is still appointment viewing, and it is still a big part of a greater India who watch these kind of programming. I've left that part, 4 years back, like 3 years back, but that doesn't mean that broadcast TV is dead. Broadcast TV has a lot to impart in this country. I think basis the kind of stories that they tell over time. It is similar to a part where, if I look at Turkey, or if I look at Indonesia for that matter, a lot of these long-running shows, the soaps are on the back of characters that these countries love, and that is where I think you go in. That is where you go in and make a difference in the lives of the commoner who wants to know or be like that person, right? And hence, I would greatly advise my colleagues here, who work in this education entertainment sphere, that it is important for you guys to identify the characters, and it is important to identify the long running shows that you want to sort of come in and be a part of. You don't necessarily start on with a new show. Like Suruchi, I think, mentioned that ER does a lot of imparts a lot of knowledge through actual actual ways of working in the world of medicine. I think as somebody who is trying to make a difference in the world of education, in the world of sexual health, it's important to pick on tracks. It's important to be a part of tracks that run for long, with the characters which are almost foundational to some shows which have become iconic in stature, right? And when we say that, Instagram, TikTok, or gaming is it today, I totally believe that it is the future, but I don't think it is the present. It is we're working towards a future, and we would love to get there. But the kind of issues that we are talking about, I think broadcast TV has a lot to play around with. I mean, there are examples which I can give you a galore, say whether it's a Balika Vadhu or whether it's a Ye Hai Mohabbatein, and whether it is a show like I said, Diya Bati Hum. All these shows have done enough and more in terms of education, entertainment, which most other mediums have failed to do, because that is the power of storytelling. That is where you need to get storytellers into your system and weave it into the meta narrative of broadcast television. Going forward, I must say that the OTT, I mean, digital is again divided into two parts. One is the OTT universe, which is where long format shows are making a big change. But again, like I said, pay OTT, behind the wall OTT is still very small in this country. We're just scratching at the surface. It is going to take, I think the next few years are going to be great for us. I personally am extremely happy that, I'm sort of, I am trying to, or we are being able to tell the stories that we've not been able to tell for a long time, because of the impediments of working either in television or on films, because you can only do so much in these two platforms. But having said that, we have a lot of catching up to do. And if you're looking at education, entertainment in this country, we necessarily do. I mean, I think to start with, it's not easy to look at the top of the pyramid. I think we should look at the bottom of the pyramid, and that is where lies your audience, and that is where your iconic characters help, and that is where the network broadcasters come into play. Sometimes what I feel where the sectors that you guys work on go wrong in terms of probably over-indexing on certain free free-to-air channels, which is where I feel that which is where I feel that you guys might need to sort of look at a little more pay TV world, where there is a great I feel there's an audience who are extremely they follow these shows religiously, and which is why it is extremely sticky, and hence it helps with all the narrative that you want to sort of impart to the audience scape that you're looking at, right? I think, like I said, if I have to look at just the numbers, the numbers speak for you, right? The numbers today still, and I'm giving you numbers from last week, it's about 860 million people on the broadcast universe, and that is just HSM. I'm not even looking at the South market or the other markets here. Uh, if we can identify the right topics, if we can identify the right kind of storytelling, if we can make it a little more relevant today and not fall back to the and probably negate the grammar that we were used to 10 years back, there is a lot to be achieved. And if you can come in midway, or probably even at the outset, depending on the structures that you draw out, I feel there is a lot to be achieved in this country, and all of us would benefit. About the OTT world, yes, that segmentation needs to be thought about much more carefully. And that is something which I will leave to you guys to sort of work on a little bit more, because I would think that the freemium market is no different from the television market, right? And that freemium market is basis 4G, 5G connectivity, basis many other things, basis smartphones, basis availability of that smartphone in that family, because essentially if a smartphone is bought, the smartphone remains with the man most of the time in this country, right? So and those are questions that need to be answered, right? And if I look at the premium television channel or premium television programming, I think you should just leave it out. It's not something which will cater to the kind of programming strategy or programming that you would want to work with, because that's very high end. That doesn't sort of really, I mean, barring if you look at really small cohorts, great. If you're looking at larger cohorts, that's not the way to go about it. I can't speak for, I think Facebook or YouTube or TikTok are individual led in most of the times. At least YouTube is very individual led. It's sort of, if you partner with the right partners, the right story can be imparted, but then that's a bit of a hit and miss. Yeah, so that's pretty much the hypothesis that I have for the content landscape in this country today. But if I were to sum it up, should I leave broadcast television out of the picture? Absolutely not. I think they're still the biggest player. Should we leave the OTTs out? Of course not. That's the future, and that's where we should go. But for the education, sexual health sectors to work better for a greater part of India, I think I would over-index on the first than the second.
Thanks so much, Shagato. Thank you so much.
Sorry,
Purnima, over to you.
sorry. Thank you so much, Shagato. And I think it was a really great juxtaposition and a discussion between the last two speakers. The media market in this country as well as globally is in a great flux, is messy. It's not easy to figure it out. But yeah, I think we have to keep in mind that we are not yet ready to, sound the death knell on broadcast TV. With that, over to our last panelist, Archana. Archana is a sector expert and the driving force behind the EE projects at the center. We would like to understand from you the donor perspective on entertainment education as a tool for behavior change. And how do you see the future in terms of entertainment education being leveraged for social?
So thank you so much, Purnima, and thanks to all the panelists. It's been a great discussion. I think what I'd like to say that as far as Gates Foundation is concerned, we really care about what Shugato spoke about, which is, audience who really sit at the bottom of the pyramid. These are people who are vulnerable. These are people who do not have access to health and development provisions, perhaps not even education. So there is information asymmetry. There is also in terms of the gaps that we are trying to plug, and that's what we think about. So from a donor's perspective, really you have a complete toolkit, right? You have your toolbox and you look at the outcomes. So sometimes, well, for a campaign you might go the mass media route, but the issues that other panelists have spoken about, whether it is about deep-seated norms that are very, very hard to shift, these are societal norms, but at the same time dealing with complex issues which perhaps are not necessarily communicated well with normal short formats. The long formats work much better. So what we are doing as donors is really driving our outcomes and looking at this toolbox available to us and seeing for ourselves what helps us deliver to those outcomes. What would bring about that behavior change most effectively and more comprehensively. I would say that. The second thing that I'd say is that we've dabbled around with different formats in India. So with Population Foundation of India, there is a long standing serial that we have funded, which is Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hoon. It is in its third season. We funded season 2 and season 3, dealing with complex issues of family planning, dealing with issues of women's agency, domestic violence. We've seen some positive movement around conversations. The ability of women to actually come out and have conversations and have agency to speak about these issues is giving us confidence. The other one that we did this year was with BBC Media Action and in partnership with Viacom was complex issues of urban sanitation and issues of fecal sludge management. Now, fecal sludge management is not necessarily something that people engage with. They do not have enough knowledge as far as septage management is concerned. So excellent storytelling set in context of Mohalla, where there will be, issues and fights around septage and water flowing into small, out of your home and making places dirty. So, in a context of a drama, it was realized through evaluation again done by CSBC and OPM that higher levels of exposure led to better understanding of importance of installing a septic tank. The cognitive elaboration around construction, desludging, and disposal really improved. So, we are seeing that entertainment education can help move and people understand certain complex issues. The third one that I'd say is something that we're working on with MTV Nishad is and there we've taken, so there is an what I'd like to say is that we're not only going with just the broadcast or the television traditional route. What we are doing with all these formats is experimentation with new media, right? You are realizing the fact that, well, traditional media is still strong. Shogato spoke about it. Still single television households, at least people who we care about, still watching television. But we know the reality that other form of media is actually growing. So what you're trying to do is experiment with layering in with upcoming media, emerging media, and you're trying to measure that, right? So with MTB Initiate, at least we did not, there were other funders for television, but what we funded really was the digital platform. And my hope is that really, one of the areas and one of the questions that Elena also spoke about is sustainability of entertainment education. So what I care about is that, can we really build a community of young people, of youth who care about SRH issue? They're given stimulus and they're given content up to a certain point in time. And we hope that this community sustains over a longer period of time. Now, will that happen or won't that happen is still to be evaluated, because this program is still, the digital program is still to be rolled out. But my hope is to see some amount of sustainability. Apart from outcomes, I would say the second thing that we really look at is ROI, right? So we've spoken about, it's not necessarily, you have the traditional measures of cost per contact, cost per exposure, cost of conversion. But really, if you think about, the the immediate outlays or what you put out of your pocket is going to be high when you're thinking about production. And Shugato did give another format, which is to say, do you really have to produce from new? Why don't you embed content or embed messages into long running successful programs as well? Now that's another format that we've experimented with. So there is a way that you can manage the ROI. But over a period of time, if you look at the shelf life of the programs, if you look at the reruns, if you funded a movie for that matter, because if you again think about movies like Dangal or Chinikam or Pink, which that actually shifted mindsets, they have a long stay. So right, so it really depends on the ROI in terms of how you're measuring. We care a lot about sustainability. All our investments are seen from a sustainability lens. I think that's where we struggle with entertainment education, because we do not understand the tipping point. We do not understand diffusion of this, of messages within society. And if it is really, are these behaviors going to sustain over a long period of time? What if this content truncates? How long is the effect? How long is the carryover effect? I think we really struggle in terms of literature, in terms of evaluation when it comes to sustainability. But we're hoping that with our funding, what we can do, or with practitioners who are interested, we can do experiments to understand how we can make entertainment education more sustainable. The last point that I'd like to make is really on the producer side. So it was music to my ear when Shogato said that, hey, the television industry or entertainment industry is really open in terms of embedding content. But that's not necessarily been my experience. When I was with the private sector, I had done content integration. It was far easier. However, in the health and development sector, when I think of our issues, which is about women not necessarily being able to rise up or progress in the society, or a woman not having access to the same provisions that a man would. Now these are very much integrated within the the broadcaster's content. But if you say, can you bring about issues of family planning, or can you think about issues that are related to a woman's struggle when it comes to agriculture, but suddenly they'll just shy away, and you're looking at TRPs. It is a competitive world. But this coming forward of the industry, because if you, again, if I make an argument in terms of big box grossers, whether you look at movies that have really been built on social issues, or you look at serials that have been produced on social issues, have done extremely well. But the industry is not necessarily coming forward. And the second thing that I'd say is that perhaps the producers care a lot about how their programs are doing, how their protagonists how are they measuring up into people's imagination. But but there is a fine line in terms of, are you really stereotyping women within the confines of your household as you see them today? Are you setting expectations in terms of how they look and how they dress? Because people are watching those serials, right? It is having an impact on their lives. So there is some responsibility that is also required. While at one end you can say, hey, we do a lot of service to the country, but at the same time you're actually on a certain degree, or you know, you do end up stereotyping women. So there is a degree of responsibility as well with the fraternity. You know, so I would say that, you know, to sum up, I would say that as a donor, we look for outcomes, and we can use any format, absolutely any format that lets us reach that objective. We have used entertainment education. We're learning a lot more. We're seeing that in, you know, encouraging results. The second thing that we care about is ROI. Rigor is something that is very, you know, that is in our DNA. It's part of our core strategy. We look at hard measures, we look at numbers, and therefore, you know, to that matter, are we achieving our outcomes is something that we evaluate, and we put a lot of premium on that rigor. It's very critical to Gates Foundation. The third thing that I'd say is sustainability. All our investments are seen from the sustainability lens. And the third and the fourth side I'll say is that we look for long-standing partnerships. So if the fraternity is moving forward to us, whether it is the digital fraternity, whether it is the broadcaster fraternity, and if they're really ready to partner with us and experiment with us and make an impact on people's lives, Gates Foundation will really welcome that. So I'll just stop here.
Thanks so much, Archana. So we are actually over the budgeted time, but completely all right given the fascinating discussions and conversations today. We can extend the session by 10-15 minutes. So we're hoping during that time we can cover a few questions. So this question that I'm starting out with is open to all panelists. And it's a methodological question, so measurement question. How can we measure the permanence or consistency with the desired behaviors that have been changed? How long does the behavior change last? So yeah, anyone who would be interested in taking up, very welcome to.
So if I can take a stab at that, it's really dependent on the behavior, right? We can't say, well, all behaviors are supposed to last forever. It also depends on how complex the behavior is. How often do I have to do the behavior? Is it like brushing my teeth that I do every day? Or is it a behavior that I only need to do once in my lifetime, right? So I think that's really, really important to keep in mind as we are considering this. I was just thinking about some really early on research done in Brazil that showed that although effects of entertainment education weren't maintained at the same level that one saw immediately after exposure, the fact of the matter is that you never go back to baseline levels. So there is a core change that does remain over time. And there's research done, for example, in Bangladesh with the Jigasha program, which wasn't necessarily entertainment education, but it showed that this had intergenerational effects. So young girls who attended Jigasha sessions with their mothers and learned about contraceptive use were more likely to then actually grow up and use contraceptives. So there is some evidence out there that, yes, we can't maintain effectiveness without doing any interventions, but that doesn't go, that's not the same thing as saying, well, it all stops, it all disappears into a black hole. So thank you.
So can I add something? I think there's also some types of behavior where there is the nature of investment. So, you know, it's enough if you're thinking about fertility reduction, is enough to induce spacing for a few years. You're going to achieve the goal, even if the people forget about the show. Or the study I mentioned about aspirations in Ethiopia, they went back with the follow-up round of data collection, I think 5 to 7 years after the initial intervention, and they still find effects. So we have a few cases where there's evidence of long-term stickiness of these behaviors and changes, but by and large, most evaluations take a time frame of about 1 year, 1.5 years. So if not even a few months. So I think there's room for improvement.
Thank you so much, Eliana and Suruchi. So the next question is that Indian media makers, filmmakers have been knowingly or unknowingly using some behavioral science principles and subtly communicating and normalizing good habits and beliefs, slowly and sustainably changing norms. Can this be done in a more organized manner? Are there challenges to regulation if we formalize it in terms of ethics? So again, anyone who would like to take up the question.
I think Shugata is the natural owner
Um,
of this question. He can speak on the
Well, this is a tricky
behalf of
one. I think
fraternity.
the issue is yes, they're knowingly or unknowingly, at least films and television has been sort of looking at certain aspects of entertainment education and imparting some sort of messaging across that. But we have to realize, I don't know whether a coherent body or making it a sort of a more it all comes down from the story that people need to tell, and essentially most of the times those stories are owned by certain storytellers. Whether it is a dangal, whether it is a toilet, whether it is a Three Idiots, or whether it is a Diyabati, it was not told because they were trying to put in a message through it. The message was inherent to it, and the messaging came along very, very well. I assume that's kind of difficult, I would think, to sort of do it in an industry where, again, it is important to sort of go back and garner your businesses right. But I mean, I really don't have the right answer for that, frankly.
No, no, completely makes sense, Shagata. Thank you for that. So the next question is, how do you make that trade-off in edutainments where you want to make that content relatable and reflect some of the existing household norms like gender roles, but also don't want to be propagating one bias to address another? So yeah, a content-based question.
So I think that's a very good question. The moment your messaging becomes preachy and the moment it becomes in your face, I think the audience switches off, and that's very, very clear. It needs to be subtle. It needs to be woven into the story organically. It cannot be just being sort of. It cannot come across as a very clear messaging in the first place. Our audiences have also evolved in the consumption of storytelling, long form storytelling, for some time. Now, I think one needs to be clever about that, and one needs to come in a little early on and figure out a track where they can impart that message without altering the course of the main story. And that is the tricky bit. So I feel that it is important that the sector here works with storytellers who would be both empathetic to the character and empathetic to the message. If we can get that poise right, we should be able to do it. I don't think there's no reason why we can't.
And I can add a little bit in terms of how Gates Foundation works, and we do realize the value of editorial freedom, right? Because after all, you have to make sure that the program does well, and those messages are embedded well, and this is really what the creative minds can bring to the table. However, I would say that nowadays even the creative team at the broadcasters end, they are so attuned to research as well as numbers. They are perhaps they are strategic planners of content themselves rather than just being creative, traditional creative, go with gut and storytelling and make out. I mean, they're looking at numbers and data pretty carefully, right? I mean, they are also held accountable for numbers. To that vein, just understanding the programs really well, understanding the issues very well, understanding whether you are really advancing are you actually furthering, or you're furthering the norm, or you're actually shifting it, right? So that is really, really important. That partnership will be critical in terms of, are you stereotyping, or are you really helping advance the issue?
Thanks, Archana and Shagato. So the last but one question: do influencers really have to be famous? In much of mainstream mainstream content, protagonist is too ideal to emulate. Aren't norms most influential when subtle? More empathizing characters can do better job of changing beliefs. So, yeah.
So maybe I can start here with some evidence from a very recent and fascinating study that was done in Indonesia by Ben Olken and co-authors, where they had very famous people send tweets about health-related actions that people could take. And sometimes the tweet was clearly kind of retweeting or pushing a message from someone else, and other times it was in their own words, or it was, you know, if I'm not sure I remember correctly, but I remember there was this distinction where if the tweet wasn't really perceived as coming from the person, it had no effect whatsoever, and people cared about the authenticity. And so if we think about popular figures who might, you know, lend you their name or their face, but people see a disconnect between what they're saying and who they are, I don't think that's gonna work. It might work better to have a completely unknown person who for some reason creates a viral video or whatever, but that seems more authentic. At the same time, there is potential for these highly influential people make change. And I think what Siddhartha was saying was a bit in this direction. I am slightly uneasy in, you know, kind of handing it over to them to serve this educational role, because we have no control over their agenda, over what they're going to pass on as a message, together with what you think they will pass on. So one advantage of the more traditional and maybe outdated approach is that you could in some way regulate content. You knew what was going to be screened, and you had a way of agreeing about what was going to be screened. Once you go the complete decentralized way with the influencers, you lose control over that. And I think there is a risk in that path.
Yeah.
If I can just add to that very quickly, I think influencers have to be of 2 or 3 kinds. I think the first is, like Suruchi said, I think our whole presentation was about storytelling, right? And at the heart of entertainment education is storytelling. Now that story needs to be believable. Very often when you have a famous person, it reduces the believability factor, right? You know, the narrative that you're trying to build gets distracted by the fact that you know that so-and-so is Amitabh Bachchan or so-and-so is whoever, right? So that's one part of it. So it has to be believable for the story. And that means it can be anybody, right? It could be somebody who's a good actor. The second part of it is that there are influencers who bring influence because a community believes and trusts in them. But that trust is for a certain thing, right? If not every actor will be trusted for every issue. So finding that right balance of the right influencer for the right issue is really critical. And I just wanted to kind of reinforce the message that I was trying to give, that when you select influencers online, right, and they're very powerful, right? They're very influential. You can go completely wrong with it if you're not making the right choice. And I completely agree with Shogato and everybody else that if you just randomly pick, you have zero control over the creative content or the narrative, you're going to lose the plot, and it can go in any different direction. And therefore, applying old principles of designing a program would not apply to new ways of doing business, right? So you need to reimagine how you would work with influencers in this new world. How would you control the narrative at a mass level and yet bring about change? So I think the only one thing I wanted to say as my end note is that, you know, storytelling is critical. Storytelling to some degree for entertainment education needs to be controlled, but the old paradigm works for the old medium. New paradigms work for new medium. You will design things differently. And that's why I would encourage everyone to go and check out the Lifeline app. It's the most compelling storytelling I've ever seen. Like, you would get chills while you're going through it and you're participating in it. It's not bad storytelling. It's just a different medium designed in a very different way. So think of medium and message as 2 things that work together, not you can't just take a TV drama, put it on OTT. I mean, you can put it on OTT, but you can't just put it on YouTube, right? And it won't work the same way. Messages have to be designed differently, conceived differently, and delivered differently.
And
Okay,
just
so
one thing, sorry, Sandhya, there
yeah.
is enough and more research that's available in terms of identifying influencer networks, right? So celebrities have a value, but especially for programs like family planning, we do care about, is mother-in-law more influential? Is it the husband? Is it the ASHA worker? Or say, for example, in the case of sanitation, who would be? Is it the neighbor and neighbor getting a toilet? A decision factor for a household to get a toilet or not, right? So who influences, and not necessarily it's celebrities, they do have a role to play in terms of believability, etc., that others have spoken about.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Archana, said Ileana. The last and final question. There are a lot of entertainment education dramas which have characters named around the issue being tackled, such as Shaucha Singh in the BBC drama for Swachh Bharat Mission. Do we feel giving away the purpose of the entertainment education program throws the audience off the topic and takes away the persuasion of the narrative?
Sorry, everyone. I apologize. I just wanted to say that I need to go because there's a World Congress session that I need to attend, and I'm one of the program chairs. I hadn't foreseen that it would go until this time. So I will leave that last question to the other panelists, but I wanted to thank them for really inspiring inputs. I'm going to think a lot about what we discussed today.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you
have to
again.
leave as well. I'm
Bye
so
bye.
sorry, but I have to leave as well. I have a meeting which is overflowed. So
No
people are
problem.
waiting in another meeting. So I
Thank you.
have to drop out. Thank you so much for, having me here. It was lovely meeting you all and learning from you guys. Hope to see you soon. Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you, Ileana and Shobhatu. I'm just wondering if anyone wants to take the last question or.
So I can quickly answer and then others can add
Yeah,
on. This was
sure.
not the experience. I mean, so when we went in with the sanitation based messaging, it was a hard one on fecal sludge management, right? Who would want to see a program that has content around septic tanks and septage management, right? That was a tough one. You don't make it mass media, and it was a broadcast. It was with Viacom, but it was good to have somebody believe that complex issues can be actually told in a storytelling format, and the evaluation that I spoke about very briefly did show that people were engaged. They were able to recall characters. It was amazing storytelling. It was set in a context of Mohalla, what I spoke about. There were fights around septage management, etc. So it just the way that you weave difficult issues into stories, I think that, and that Suruchi spoke a lot about it, right? How do you bring out complex issues in storytelling?
Yeah.
So I think we went the other extreme of bringing in fecal sludge management into content.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone. I think with this, we come to the end of the webinar. It was a very interesting discussion, a very fascinating conversation, and precisely some of the questions that the center has been trying to answer through the impact evaluations that we've led and managed. We understand that behaviors have complex psychological and socioeconomic origins, but as Homo narrans, Suruchi, if I may borrow that phrase, we are beings that tell stories, and we exchange knowledge. So narratives help us to break down complex concepts into relatable, entertaining pieces that really engages audience. We know entertainment education has impact in terms of knowledge, attitudes, to some extent, norms and behaviors, but there are questions remaining, particularly given the fragmented media market, on just how do we conceptualize these content pieces? How do we ensure that as our audience is consuming different pieces of media, how are we reaching them there, like Siddharth was saying? But as Shogato was saying, how do we sort of ensure that the comprehensiveness of that narrative, that character, the richness of the character that we bring to maybe say a Diya or Bati Hum is still sort of being maintained, and we continue to fascinate and engage our characters to our audience towards desired behaviors. So yeah, thank you so much everyone for joining today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, and thank you so much to the fellow panelists.
Everyone.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to the participants and the attendees.